Welcome to the Change the Game podcast, where we're changing the game by doing business differently and highlighting stories of capitalism at its best. I'm Steve Baker, and with me as always is Rich Armstrong. How are you today, Rich?
Good, Steve. How are you?
Very excited today. We've got one of our friends. In fact, I think we owe him like a blazer like they give to SNL hosts after they've been on a few times. But, good friend and special guest, Ari Weinzweig from the Zingerman's community of businesses. He's the CEO and co-founding partner of Zingerman's. And of course, for those of you who are listening that don't know what Zingerman's does, they are headquartered out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they produce, sell, and serve all sorts of fun flavored traditional foods and produce about $35 million in annual sales. Ari is probably, if he's not best known for like his corned beef or bacon or something like that, it would be as a prolific author, and he's got all kinds of books and articles out there. And his latest that we want to talk about today is Working Through Hard Times, Life and Leadership Learnings from 2020. So welcome, Ari. How are you?
I'm doing great. As well as one could do in a pandemic. I'm doing great. We've all gotten used to qualifying our level of personal well-being. So I'm good, and I feel fortunate to be in a relatively healthy organization like you all. I've come to believe that healthy organizations have better immune systems, and so we're in the context of disease, we're better able to withstand and rebound from difficult times.
Absolutely. So you're coming to us live from the Roadhouse right now.
Yep.
Could you just bring us up to speed on how the team and how the community of businesses are doing right now?
Yeah, I think we're doing pretty good. I mean, it's not great in the big picture. We have diversity, as y'all do at SRC, but we have diversity of businesses. So we have everything from our mail order business, which, like most mail order businesses over the last year, has boomed. Busiest year ever by far, all the way down to our food tour business, which has been at zero for the last 15 months and went from doing fine to having no sales in like 4 days last year. And then as a range, I mean, our bakery, the bakehouse is essentially doing well, solid, and everybody else is, like I said, zero at the low end up to about 60% here at the Roadhouse and the deli. Zing Train, our training business, like what you all deal with, is shifted to online and probably worked their way back up to about 40%. And as I mentioned before we were coming on, and I was chatting with you all, I'm going to Fort Worth next week to do my first live in-person presentation in 15 months, which I'm a little nervous about. It's been a while.
I'm sure you'll do fine.
I think I will, but it's when you've been doing it, I've been doing it for once a month, twice a month, 4 times a month for years and years, and in a good way. It's not like I don't pay attention, but get in a rhythm. It's a little like you didn't play basketball. Players, it gives me empathy for players that got hurt and they were out for a year and trying to come back. It's not like they don't have high ability. It's not like they're not going to be fine, but you need to think about things a little more than you're used to thinking about them, which can be good, but also challenging.
Absolutely.
Well, I've seen you many, many times on the stage, Ari, and I think you're going to do just fine.
Okay. Well, I'm feeling more confident as we go, but anyway, to sum up, so let's see, a little over a year ago, mid-March, when all this came apart, as I wrote about in the new pamphlet that you mentioned. So we, things were starting to look weird for a couple of weeks before it really hit. And it was kind of clear something was coming, but I don't think any of us really knew what was coming. And this is still when people were like, oh yeah, it'll be over in a week, and we had a fundraiser. I had a wonderful dog, a corgi named Jelly Bean, who lived to be 17 years, and she died 6 years ago this month. And we do a fundraiser in her memory for Safe House Center, which is the shelter for victims of domestic abuse. We live near there. all the staff used to see me and Jelly Bean going jogging every day. And so we decided to do a fundraiser in her memory to put a little positive spin on a loss. And so it's in every February. We call it the Jelly Bean Jump Up, and we have a dinner at the Roadhouse, and sometimes it's a little bit later. So it was that Tuesday night in March, the second Tuesday, and we had the fundraising dinner. We pulled it off, full room, and it went real well. And then the next day, everything came apart. And if I remember right, it was March 11th and 12th, and then the 15th was our anniversary, so our 38th anniversary organization, and we got a pandemic. Before the pandemic, I would have told you that we were on track for our fiscal year, which ends at the end of July, to do about 70 million in sales, and we had about 700 staff members. Now I'll tell you, we have about 550 staff, and we will do about a little over 50 million probably this year. The week after it started, we furloughed about 275, and we've brought back a lot of them. And now we're in the same boat everybody in the country is, which is unable to find enough people to work.
Yeah, it just switches so quickly.
Yeah, remarkable.
Well, hey, Ari, last time we were together, we talked a lot about humility and the importance of that leadership trait.
Yep.
In this past year, certainly that's been required a lot. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always required. I've started to I mean, as we talked about when I wrote that pamphlet, which came out a few months before this one, that's work I had started long before the pandemic. It wasn't like my top priority. It was a longer project, but it turned out to be particularly poignant for the year that's passed. But I've been doing a lot of work in the context of organizational ecosystems in this metaphor, and I look at culture as the soil. I just actually wrote about it for the e-news that I do tomorrow. We can put the link to the e-news somewhere in the notes too. And I started to look at humility as humus or topsoil, and really nothing great grows without it. And the natural state of the planet is there's a lot of topsoil, but through our interference, humans have depleted enormously the amount of topsoil on the surface of the planet. And this is a problem that we're all dealing with in the agricultural world, but in the organizational world, the depletion of humility, I'm going to suggest, creates similar problems. And you can access a lot of return in quotes on investment quickly without it, but to really create the kind of lasting, sustainable, meaningfully positive organization that you and I and probably everybody listening want to create, I think humility is really an essential ingredient.
That's great.
Great analogy.
It is. It's amazing. And if someone didn't have much humility, this pandemic certainly would probably teach them some.
Well, you would think, but I'm going to suggest that probably a lot of people that don't have it, they see it as not their fault. And that it's because of other people's screw ups, because part of the beauty of humility is that it helps us to see how we could have done better and reminds us that we're all in this together, and that none of us have all the answers, and whether we like it or not, we're all interdependent. This is one of the principles of open book from the beginning, and I think it's true. It's always been true. It's true now. We know, if there's no road, you can't get to work. I mean, if somebody didn't figure out how to get the electricity to my house, I don't think about it every day, but I'd be in trouble, right? So we're all interdependent, and the humility allows us to learn from everybody and help everybody from a grounded pun intended and not intended place.
Yeah. No, let's talk about what you've got out now, your latest work, Working Through Hard Times.
Yeah.
This certainly was not your first crisis that you led your team through.
Yeah.
I'm sure it won't be the last.
Yeah.
It's pretty significant. And why was it important for you to document the lessons learned from this one?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wrote the preface to it in December, and so much has already changed even in the last 2-3 months. I mean, so trying to set the stage or reset the stage for people. So this is really, looked like vaccines would come out, but wasn't really for sure. I don't think I knew anybody who'd been vaccinated. I don't want to get into politics, but the state of politics was not calm and uplifting, regardless of where one's perspective falls on the continuum. You know, it was the middle of winter in Michigan. I mean, there was a lot to be concerned about, and even within our own particular setting, up here, the caseloads had gone back up again. So dining rooms, which had been open for seating at 50%, got closed down again, which I'm not arguing with. We want people to be healthy. We want to do our part. So we were back to having only carry out. I mean, so there was a lot of darkness on the horizon. And I mean, I wasn't feeling hopeless, but it was certainly a time that I think called for us to see the bigger picture and see a more positive future, even in the darkness. So for me, that was a big piece of it. And then also, I guess, I mean, as you know, I'm a history major, so I kind of, it felt meaningful. Like, I think when this is all over, there will be thousands of books written about what happened. But I wanted to actually write something from the middle, because I think the perspective is different from the middle. And I don't mean I won't write another, like, part 2 of this when it has wound down, but I think it's interesting to do it from the middle. And as you said, the other thing that drove me was realizing, as I was writing throughout on stuff that I thought was helping us to get through, and sharing that through the e-news. And I started to realize, like, this isn't just about a pandemic. I mean, this is timeless stuff. And as you said, we've been through other crises, and we're going to go through more, and we're going to go through them on a national level, because stuff's going to happen. We're going to go through them in organizations, and that could be a crisis of leadership. It could be a crisis of a local problem that happened. It could be a weather-related tragedy, people down south getting hit with hurricanes. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And then we're all going to go through personal stuff too. We go through loss, we go through relationship issues. We all struggle at various points. And I started to realize that all the 10 essays that are in the book, in the pamphlet, are all really timeless things. I mean, it's stuff you can use anywhere, anytime, and is relevant for anybody interested.
Well, one of the lessons that you identified that I thought was pretty interesting, but not sure if I understand exactly what you were getting at, is sticking with the stuff through the zone of doubt and blame.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So I really can't remember who taught us that phrase, zone of doubt and blame, but it's a good one. Rosa Beth Moss Cantor, with a K, who wrote the book Confidence, which I really like. She used to be the editor of the Harvard Business Review, and I actually didn't know this until a few years ago, but turned out to be a University of Michigan MBA too, who, by the way, wrote her graduate work on utopian communities, which I didn't know that at all. But anyway, she calls it Cantor's Law, which is that partway through, everything looks like a failure. And in hindsight, I guess I hadn't thought about it till you just asked, but maybe in December when I wrote this, it was part of that. But it's just true. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this coaching people on open book. I mean, it's a honeymoon. You got a relationship with open book. Oh man, it's like your 4th date. This is awesome. It's going to be great. They're like the perfect person for me. Oh, this system's great. It's going to solve all our problems. No big deal, man. A couple weeks, maybe a month, we'll have this down. It's going to be fabulous, transformative, incredible. They've read all the articles. They're totally jazzed. And then, like, by month 4, and no one's coming to the huddle, and the accountant forgot to put the numbers out, and nobody talks, and and it's just starting to realize, like, okay, we're 3-4 months into a year or 2 journey, maybe 3-year journey, to really integrate this into our culture in a meaningful way. And so the zone of doubt and blame is like, it's in the beginning, you got a lot of energy. And even in the pandemic, it's like, okay, we could do this. But now you're like, in August, we're 6 months into this very challenging time. There's no end in sight. In some ways it was getting worse, not better. And again, the state of the world was uncertain. The state of politics was uncertain. Racial antipathy which is not a new issue, it's centuries old, but it was coming to the fore in very violent and difficult ways, which again aren't new, but it was in the news. And there's a lot of reasons to be down, right? And it's, you could pick your metaphor. I mean, in the game context, this is, you got a pretty decent team, but you're down 18 at halftime in a basketball game. Like, you can come back, but the great team says, okay, let's see what we did wrong and what do we got to do to get there. The not so great team gives up, and that's the zone of doubt and blame.
Yeah, I love it. Zone of doubt and blame. When you say that, it reminds me of what Jack Stack always says about the difference between players and champions. He says champions have just learned how to train through the boredom. So it's like, keep going.
No, it's true. And it's called the zone of doubt and blame because it starts to turn into this, like, whose idea was this?
Exactly.
And Stash Kazmierski, who passed away, I think it's 5 years ago this month, actually, who taught us the visioning process that I wrote about some in here and that we use so much. He used to work in a very large corporation, and he said their salute was when they asked who was responsible, they went like this, which people can't see. You can't see on the podcast, but I'm pointing each arm in the opposite direction with the finger pointing in different directions. So it was everybody but you. And I think in a healthy organization, to Jack's point, we each take responsibility for ourselves and we take shared responsibility for the collective. And that's what allows us to push through to get to the other side.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Ari, one of the things that we have all learned lately is the importance of connection. And you take that one step further, and you talk about in the new pamphlet about the power of picking up the phone and connecting people. How do you make that work in your schedule? I mean, really?
Well, yeah, it's a funny thing. And I mean, it's kind of why I wrote it up, is just like, when people started to ask me what I was, they're like, oh, you're doing all this work to take care of everybody else at work, but like, what are you doing to take care of yourself? And it's like, I don't know, I'm doing exactly the same stuff I've been doing to take care of myself for years, which is to have a good regimen around self-care so you can get through. And one of those, which I wrote about in here, is journaling, which we could come back to. And one is running every day and getting my head clear that way. And another one is my girlfriend and I cook dinner every night because I like to cook. And even though we have all these food businesses, I actually like to cook at home because it's calming, whereas eating at work is not calming. It's awesome that other people come, but if I'm at work, I'm at work. So anyway, so I do those. But I realized, like, one thing I do is just reach out to friends, colleagues, whatever, and just chat, man. And then that there's just something like it just seemed like everybody would be like, well, let's make a time. Can we make an appointment for a phone call? I'm like, can you just pick up the phone and call me? Like, whatever, and they're like, I don't want to bother you. I'm like, look, I had enough therapy to know I don't have to answer the phone. That was one of the best things I learned in therapy. It was like, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer. It's not like showing up at my house, ringing the doorbell at 1 a.m. I just won't answer and I'll call you back. And there's something nice about that impromptu, spur of the moment conversation. And sometimes people don't answer, but whatever, even if you just, I believe, even if I just leave a message, letting them know I was thinking about them, that helps. And then I just kept finding them. I've done this for a long time, but I was doing it more partly through dealing with my own stress, right? And trying to find ways to reground and anchor. And as I wrote in the pamphlet, in the essay, I mean, I was talking to one of my friends, Mary Sue Milliken, who owns Border Grill, with her business partner, Susan Feniger, out in LA. They've been in restaurants about as long as we have, and we've been friends like 25, 30 years. And anyway, I called her and we're talking, and she's telling me what they're dealing with. And it's a rough year in the restaurant business, no question. And we're getting off the phone, we're finishing up, and I'm like, yeah, well, I don't think I helped you. She said, it was great to talk to you. And I said, yeah, I feel bad. I don't think I really helped you with any of the stuff you're struggling with. She goes, no, but I feel like 10 times better. And I'm like, well, actually, I feel 10 times better too. And I mean, of course, like, this is why therapy is therapeutic, is you're talking to an empathic person, and it just helps to share and realize we're not alone. We're not the only ones struggling with how to pay the bills. We're not the only ones who don't know what to do. We're not the only ones who feel slightly incompetent and over our heads and a little bit freaked out about what's going on. And just that feeling of connection really helps, man. And if you think of what it does positively for our own energy, and then think of the impact our energy has on all the people we work with, it's pretty huge for a 10-minute phone call. big payback.
Yeah, huge, huge. And just connecting. I mean, it's one of those years that we feel so much in isolation anyway, just to get a voice on the phone and
Yep.
do something other than Zoom is probably a good idea too.
Yeah. And I mean, Rich, to answer your question logistically, I mean, I don't know, I'm not like we're in Ann Arbor, not in LA. So I don't, my drive time anywhere in town is 10 to 15 minutes max, but
Yeah.
I just make calls from the car. I mean, it's before I go, I just think of who I'm going to call. And then I got 2-3 people in mind and get the phone numbers logged up. And then I just start dialing, and you just never know, but it just really encouraged me to keep reaching out to people throughout this that I might not have called. And I think the connections pay dividends at every level. I mean, emotionally, and then really it's not my intent, but they often pay off. And people are like, oh yeah, I was just thinking I need to find somebody to do some service training for this nonprofit, and it turns into a Zing Train thing. So it's not why I called, but when you're connecting, good things come from it.
That's for sure. Well, it kind of relates to another message that you had shared in this pamphlet. In the book was that collaboration, kindness, and caring for each other is what will help us overcome, and probably has helped us overcome. You also talk about the idea of leading every day with dignity. Can you give me some examples of what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Practice?
So it's when we all talked about humility back whenever that was a few months ago, I shared, as I wrote in the humility pamphlet, it was a subject I had really never paid much attention to. I mean, clearly I knew the word. It's not like I'd never heard of it, but I mean, we didn't teach about it. We didn't talk about it in the organization. I hadn't written anything about it. And I started on the process of humility, because I got asked to speak at a symposium about it that I would have said no to, but the woman asking is wonderful, and she used to work for us, and I didn't have the heart to say no. And then I had to figure out what to say. And that really pushed me, as we started this, into a pretty interesting study of a really important concept or practice. And dignity, again, it's clearly, I know the word, clearly I'm all for it. I don't think anybody I've ever talked to said they're not for it. But what got me thinking about it in particular, in the essay that's in the pamphlet, it was back like midsummer, late summer, and there was just so much anger in the country, and people blaming each other and pointing fingers. And again, I'm not choosing sides. It's just, regardless of what side in quotes one was on, there was a lot of stuff that was not going that well, let's say. And there was a lot in the news about bringing back civility. And, back in the old days when the two political parties leaders, even if they disagreed on policy, the congressional leaders might still go have lunch together. And, they were there, and we need to bring back civility. And I was thinking, like, I mean, civility is better than anger all the time, but it's so neutral. Like, it's sort of like we can get a ceasefire, but that's not really the same as really what I believe is more important. And I realized that was dignity. And then I started to read about dignity and think about it at a deeper level. And I was like, is there really any reason not to treat anyone with dignity, regardless of whether you like them, regardless of politics, regardless of race, regardless of who they voted for? And when the more I thought about it, I can't think of a reason. Like, I can think of plenty of people I disagree with, but it's not a reason for me to not treat them with dignity. And it pushed me to really look at, essentially making a rule for myself to help embed that belief in my behavior, which is just treat everyone with dignity all the time. And I don't mean I don't slip, but I think as a life guideline, it's hard to go wrong.
Yeah.
By doing that.
I love that. It's great you always bring these ideas to the front of our minds that are probably things we should be thinking about all the time anyway. And one of the things that I've always loved about you, Ari, is you made visioning something I could consume and take into my business life, my personal life. And I've shared it with so many people. That article you wrote in Inc. all those years ago, I send it out all the time. And so it's always been important to you. You've shared the process at our annual conference before, and in the pamphlet, you're saying now's a terrific time to write. I don't know if that's counterintuitive or if I'm just from the Ozarks. So why is it a terrific time to write?
Well, see, I'm gonna treat you with dignity, whether you're from the Ozarks, Ohio, or Ontario. I don't really care. I care about you, but I'm gonna treat you well regardless. And I think, I guess just backing up to the other question is, so part of dignity, I would suggest, is treating everybody like the unique human being that they are, because all of the work around, people from Appalachia do this, or Democrats do this, or it's like, it's so dehumanizing. And, we do it in casual ways too, when we say stuff like, whatever, how, I'm from Chicago. So it's like, this is what a Bears fan is. Well, it's like, there's a lot of Bears fans, dude, and they're not all the same. So if we do it at that casual level, unthinkingly, then when we actually attach those same behaviors to things that actually have difficult emotional pieces attached to them and centuries of challenge attached to them, it doesn't go well. So I try to teach myself to just honor that everybody's different, and that my job is to honor them for who they are as best I can. Anyway, visioning, yes, I think I do believe it was counterintuitive, certainly for me, as somebody who grew up worrying a lot. The last time I would feel grounded enough to write a vision of my future would be in the middle of a year of crisis. But I've learned the hard way that although it feels counterintuitive, and by the way, that's learned, it's not naturally counterintuitive, but
a belief.
it's a belief. Although it feels counterintuitive, it's actually probably one of the most important times, because when we don't know where we're going, there's just way more the confusion and emotional ups and downs of what my Irish friend Aisling Rogerson in Dublin calls riding the Corona coaster. One day you're up, one day you're down. One day you think you got it, the next day you don't know if you're going to be in business another 2 weeks out. That it's actually much easier to handle that emotional instability and uncertainty when you know where you're going. So if we have that clarity of what we want our life to be like 5 years, 3 years, 10 years down the road, then the struggles of getting through this year and a half, whatever it's going to turn out to be, are difficult, but we can just keep taking a deep breath. We know where whatever the end zone is. We know the cathedral we're building, whatever metaphor you want to use. We can keep going, even if we got knocked down, knocked back, lost our bearings for a few minutes. We can still take a deep breath and go like, okay, here's where I'm headed. And without that, depending on how you've got up from getting knocked down, you might be going in a complete opposite direction and not even realize it.
You certainly practice what you preach. And I did notice that you guys released your new vision for the year 2032.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just share some highlights about that, but maybe for the audience, kind of the process you went through with your team to develop that?
Yeah, and I was actually just working on a piece for it before we got on the call for another pamphlet, because I'm going to put one out with a couple additional essays about visioning that haven't been put in print on paper before, and then also put in the 2032 vision, the 2020 vision, which preceded it, and the 2009 vision that we wrote in 1994, which is the first time that we actually wrote a vision in this way. So the 2032, it's funny because we wrote in 2006 and 7, we wrote our 2020 vision. And when we got to like 2018, the way we do this, vision's not timeless like a mission statement. By contrast, they're time specific. And so it was written to end in 2020. And so, 2018, it's kind of obvious we got to get going. And writing a long-term vision when you're a couple years out is rarely urgent, but it is important. But other things pop up that push it back here and there. And inevitably, when you engage, as we do, by consensus at the partner level, so this is 20 people trying to come to agreement, which we did, but come to agreement on the future we want and get staff input, because we're an inclusive organization. And even if they don't get the final say, we want to hear people's voices. So anyway, we were set to actually roll out the 2032 vision at the end of March last year. Well, needless to say, that didn't happen. And about a month or two into the pandemic, when I was chatting some of those phone calls, and people were, in their trying to find humor in the darkness, would say stuff like, well, I guess you're going to have to rewrite a new vision now. And of course,
Ouch.
this led me to self-doubt and anxiety. But I went back and reread what we had written, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think anything has to change. I mean, it's 12 years out. Like, I doubt we're going to be wearing masks in 2032. There'll be plenty of new problems, but whatever they got to come up with, people smarter than me are going to figure out healthcare solutions to this, and we'll be on to some new challenges long since, I'm sure, by then. And I chatted with other people, Maggie from Zing Train, Paul, my partner, people I've been working with a long time, and they're like, yeah, no, there's really nothing that needs to change. So we held course, and then this January, we actually held a town hall on Zoom, not my preference, but on Zoom, where we did the formal rollout. So very little had changed since then in March, other than tweaking some grammar and some sentence structure and a few words here and there, and filling in some missing subheadings. But other than that, it stayed where it was. So I'm happy to send it to anybody who wants to look. If they email me, it's ari@zingermans.com. I'll send it back, and then it'll be hopefully later this spring or early summer, I guess, out in this new pamphlet, if I get my essay done. and anyway, but some of the highlights. So I mean, much of it is true to where we've come from. I mean, it's important, I think, in a vision for a longer term organization, you don't want to lose your roots. So there's a lot about food and getting even better at quality. We've been thinking of continuous improvement since long before the Toyota book, thanks to Dr. Leiker, got written. This is just the way we've always approached life, as y'all have down there. It talks about guest service, and in the context of being in the moment, it talks about how everybody else is going to technology and mass service methods. I won't say who it was, but I just had a couple very frustrating days trying to book a hotel reservation, where first the website, I tried like 8 times and I couldn't get it to go through. So then I'm like, all right, I'm going to call. Very nice woman, but it was very slow. And we got near the end, and she's like, oh no, my computer locked up. It's not going through. And then like, finally she's like, well, I'm going to have to transfer you over to one of my colleagues. And I'm like, I have to start again? She's like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like,
Nice.
seriously? Anyway, but so what we want to focus on a positive note, we want to focus on being able to bring that personal touch back to the dignity, bring that personal touch to the interaction when people are being treated more and more like statistics pulled off of social media covertly. We want to treat you for who you are and really be able to bring a personalized experience as much as we can to everybody, because I believe we can differentiate ourselves. So there's a lot of that. Then there's some stuff that's new, like it talks about succession planning. I mean, what you guys are also dealing with, because Jack's, pretty much of mine and Paul's era, right? So by doing it 12 years out, it allows us to talk about the succession in a healthy way, but nobody's pushed out the door tomorrow. But it gives a clear message to the up and coming people, like by 2032, Paul and I will not be in the day-to-day, and hopefully we'll still be engaged, but we're not going to be in the day-to-day. So it doesn't have to say exactly which week it's happening on, but it does give you a clear picture of where we're going, and it sets the stage to have continuity and both, let's say, belief continuity, strategic continuity, et cetera. Then it opens up some new territory for us too, in good ways. Like it says that we're going to be open to opening other Zingerman's businesses, which has been our vision for a while, to create this community, but that we're going to be open to non-food businesses.
Huh.
So I've been thinking a lot about a business that refinishes old engine parts. Do you think that's a good idea? No,
Who knows?
Might work, man. I don't know. It sounds, but anyway, no.
Work.
So being open to non-food businesses, and as you know, I mean, it's a lot driven for us by what the prospective partner wants to do. But so it could be anything from a craft jeweler to I don't know, a tattoo artist, to a gardening business, to really anything. I mean, I still have this fantasy of going back to a really amazing customer service focused gas station like when I was a kid, like where they come out and clean your window. Like, I mean, dude, I paid 20 cents more a gallon in a heartbeat to get treated with respect and actually have somebody come out there and have a nice conversation.
Yeah.
So that's in there. It talks about doing more of our work with young people. So this is starting to teach the visioning work you've mentioned, teach the dignity stuff, teach our energy management, all of these things that we've taught through Zing Train and I've been writing about. They're really life skills. I mean, I wish I would have learned it at 8. Like I didn't have to screw up a lot of my life to learn them. I could have learned it as a 10-year-old because it's really a life skill. I mean, in hindsight, like I'm like, how do they let you into University of Michigan when you have no vision of what you want to do? And I paid, my family and I paid out of state tuition. So it's not inexpensive and you have no idea where you're going. Right. So I think these are life skills. We want to do that. And then it talks about diversity and inclusion work. I mean, this is huge. They're not, I would suggest they're not the same thing. Although the terms have become a little bit bounded in common conversation. You can have diversity, but not inclusion, and you could have inclusion without diversity. And we want to be able to really bring those to life. This is not in the least about blaming. I just look at like, we're all here, we're all responsible for making things better. And I'm not really that obsessed about who caused what to happen, but I'm more focused on how do we as an organization contribute to creating a more positive, holistic, and dignity-filled future for everybody. And then it talks also about working in harmony with nature. So this has to do with the ecological footprint. And then, as you know, a lot of my writing is about human nature and treating people, you know, as we've been talking about. So, and then it closes out with a section on love, which is something that I've said, and I will continue to say, if you had told me in 1982 when we opened that I'd be talking about love at work, I would have rolled my eyes and laughed at you. But I've come to see that, I mean, it's in our mission statements at Paul's suggestion, I think, since 1991. And I've come to really see that is my belief is that in a healthy ecosystem, coming back to this metaphor, that love is what emanates from a healthy ecosystem. And in the same way that with energy, like it's much easier to have good energy, as you and I know, when you're part of a healthy organization. And we're also at the same time fully each responsible to bring positive energy every day. So it's not blaming the ecosystem. It's just easier in a good ecosystem. And I've realized it's the same with love. And just like dignity, writing that into vision has pushed me like, how do I bring love into every interaction that I have? And we have a lot of work to figure out what that really means now, because the vision's where we're going, but we've got to figure out how to really implement it. But I think I believe it's actually, it's good for humanity. Is good for us as people, as part of the organization. It enhances our contribution to the community, because whether the customer can say that that's why they liked coming here, I will argue that that is a big piece of what they like about being here, and that it's helped keep us going through the pandemic, because people go where they can feel hopeful, they go where they feel cared for, and where they feel treated with dignity. And it's not on the menu, so to speak, but it is in what we deliver.
Amen. I love it.
Great.
Well, I have to shift gears a little bit because I've been dying to ask you this question anyway. I mean, first of all, you knew you were a radical because you're talking about love and dignity and business. What are you? You're a heretic. but let's go back to something. Every time I've seen you, Ari, if you weren't speaking, you had your Mac out and you were writing. And so can you give us civilians a little tip or two about how to create a discipline of writing? Because I think it's really therapeutic from the sound of it.
Yeah. Well, I can only tell you what works for me. There's lots of books about it. I mean, in many ways, I think it's what creates a discipline around anything. And I just wrote a piece in the E-News a few weeks ago. It's sort of what Stash Kazmirsi taught us to call a belated glimpse of the obvious. But I had written a piece the previous week about one of the natural laws on that list that I wrote in part 1 of the business book. And it's natural law number 11, which is that great things generally take a lot longer to make happen than most of us want to believe. And this is just true. I mean, you know, people look at what we do or what y'all do down there, and it's like, oh man, they're like an overnight success. It's like,
Yeah,
did you
right.
actually read the book Great Game of Business? Like, it's anything but, man. And you know, even when people look at whatever great musicians that are 22 and they're like, man, they're like a overnight success. I found every single time I start to really pay attention, their whole family was in music.
They
They
were
were
raised
playing
with it.
guitar from the time they were 4. Their mother got them a ukulele when they were 5. Every holiday they were singing together, you know, and my family didn't do any of that. I mean, so I don't mean that I would have been a great musician, but I just learned it from the outside in by listening, but I wouldn't ever make an attempt to do it. And so it takes a long time. And what I realize is it takes a really long time to change a belief.
Yeah. Yeah.
Much to my frustration, because I want to, in my unconscious, I want people to just like me, just decide you're doing it and like, let's get on with it already. But the reality is it takes a long time. And one of the ways that I realize that we can make that happen is through either a regimen or, and this isn't new news, but I mean, through a regimen or some rule that we uphold. And you know, I'm not religious, but people who go to church every Sunday or go to synagogue every Saturday, like they're take it very seriously and in a good way. I mean, it's meaningful to them, and that their diligence helps them uphold that meaningful tradition to them. And that's why for me, as I said, like I just run every day. Now, I'm not saying everybody else should. I'm sure it's not the healthiest thing. I'm really slow, but I just keep running. And it just allowed me to like, there's no excuses. Like that count. Like there's always excuses, but they don't matter because I'm in Michigan, man. It's almost always too hot, too wet, too cold. I'm in the food business. It's always busy and somebody always called in sick. You know, there's always 1,000 reasons not to go. But once I was just like, you know what, I'm just going every day, then it doesn't matter if I'm in the mountains. I've gone when it's 8 degrees. I've gone when it's 108 degrees, and I just keep going unless I'm like really, really sick or whatever. And so I think with the writing, it's the same thing. So one piece for me, which I wrote about in the pamphlet, is I journal every morning. That's not really writing for publication, but it does get my brain going in meaningful ways.
Sure.
In terms of writing for publication, I mean, I'm gonna say it's partly self-discipline, not in a flippant way, but it's just like I just take it seriously.
Yeah.
And then I've learned over the years a lot. I'll highly recommend a book by Brenda Ueland, Ueland, that was written in 1937 called "If You Want to Write." She was also a radical in her own amazing way, and her writing really flipped a lot of my beliefs about writing around, because I used to fixate on every sentence and worry, and I didn't have the. And then she just was like, why don't people understand that writing is just talking on paper? Like, relax. And when I read that, I was like, totally, like, what's the big deal? Like, just, I know what I want to say, just say it. Like, stop trying to write like I think a writer writes, and just say what I want to say. And that helped me reduce stress. And then I've just learned, like, I guess it's kind of the zone of doubt and blame, because I go through that with every article I write and every e-news I write. And I actually wrote about that a month or so ago. Like, every time I sit down to write that e-news, I'm like, this sucks.
Yeah.
People are going to hate it. Jenny Tubbs, who edits for me, is going to like send the whole thing back and tell me it's terrible. And no one's going to like it. And this happens to me every single week. And I just have learned that feeling is normal. Don't pretend it's not happening, but also don't let it stop me.
Yeah.
And just keep writing. And I've learned, just like with the visioning stuff, as you know, the faster you type or the faster your hand moves to write, the less the voices can get in the way. And I just have learned enough by doing this that sometimes the stuff I think is good when I'm writing it isn't that good later. And the stuff that I thought sucked actually was much better than I thought. So, and then in that spirit, I mean, doing the e-news, I mean, I've been doing our print newsletter for a long time, decades, but the e-news every week, it's challenging, but in a good way. And so every week, I mean, it comes out, and I just sent mine in yesterday at 3:00. And this morning I re-edited it, and tomorrow they're going to send me the proof to just find a few last things, and it'll go out tomorrow afternoon.
That's
Good
awesome.
advice.
So what is next for you, Ari, in terms of your writing? You're always
I'm working, like I said, on this visioning pamphlet to come out. You know, it depends, because we're self-published, then I only have my own deadlines.
Yep.
And then also, it's not really my writing per se, but we have our statement of beliefs coming out. So this is work that came out of the beliefs book. So we've long had our guiding principles or values, there's 8 of them, and we've had those for 30 years. But this is getting clarity around beliefs that are not about ethics per se. They're just more about how we work, and it's realizing, like, it's the cultural norms that people find out usually by doing it wrong, and then somebody goes, no dude, we don't do that here. You know, and it's just stuff like, we believe in visioning, right? So if you don't, I don't judge you, I can help you, but you're going to have a really hard time working here, because this is what we believe. So why not just tell people before they start? And then it'll also help us with decision making. So like the first one on the list is that we focus on positive beliefs, right? And so even for me, having done this belief work for 5, 6, 7 years, it's still been very eye-opening to realize how many people who I like working with, but still default, as I did for much of my life, to negative beliefs. It doesn't make them bad people, but they just see you know, I don't know, I don't really believe that she means it. Well, how is that helpful? You know, so that's coming out in print actually in a couple of weeks, so people will be able to buy it online, like our staff handbook and all that. And then after that, this whole ecosystem thing, which started as an essay, or started as in part as an introduction in part 4 of the book, which is on beliefs, where I first thought of beliefs as the root system of our lives, and expanded on a bit, has expanded a lot. And I thought I'd write an essay or a pamphlet on that, but as I've been working at it, it keeps evolving, which I guess is appropriate for an ecosystem. And now it's clearly turning into part 5 of the book, which is good news, but it also means it's not going to come out in the next few months. So that's what I'm working on.
That's awesome. Well, Ari, it's always so much fun to talk to you, and it's thought-provoking, and I do feel the love. We always try to wrap up by asking this question. What is one question we should be asking you?
Well, that's a great question. I was listening to a podcast on soil health the other day, because we do a lot more and more with regenerative agriculture. And so the guy asked, the person being interviewed was asked a question. He laughed and he goes, you know, people who are really good at podcasts always say, that's a good question, while they figure out what to answer. Which is of course true, but I don't know. I mean, I think for me, I guess I'll just say, to come back to your writing questions, is that I didn't consciously write the pamphlet to help myself, but I realized that the writing, as you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, it was actually therapeutic for me. And I've written a few pieces over the years. The epilogue of part 3 of the book on self-management is about a good friend of mine who died way too young from lung cancer, and I wrote a piece about her, and I wrote a piece about my mother after she died 14 years ago, I think, next week. You know, and just I realize it's helped me to deal with stuff. I was listening to a podcast by David Kessler about grief, and he studied under the woman whose name I've drawn a blank on, who's the famous person who wrote the 5 stages of grieving.
Kubler-Ross.
Yeah, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Thank you. And he studied with her, and he has proposed a 6th stage, which is adding meaning. And it made sense, because when I look back, like even with Jelly Bean, my dog that I mentioned, making that fundraiser in her memory gave some meaning. And it doesn't mean that we think the loss is good. It's just, as he said, it doesn't mean you're happy that the person passed away. It means that you put meaning for yourself into how you dealt with the grief. And I think the writing for me is a way to help process that. And it put meaning into the pandemic in a context, I guess, in hindsight, that it wasn't necessarily conscious when I sat down to write. But in hindsight, I realized that it actually did that. And then in a way, it's a way of grieving the reality. Like, you know, not like things weren't changing every day anyway, because ecosystem, it's always changing, but it's a loss for us. And, even if everything went back 100% to the way it was a year and a half ago, it's still the loss of a year and a half of our lives. So I think for me that helped. So there you go.
Yeah, that's great. So for the audience, that the pamphlet you're referring to, Working Through Hard Times, is now available. Can you share with folks how they can get their own copy?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do in order to be congruent with my beliefs and our values, we do all the publishing here in town. We print everything, design everything, and we print them locally in Ann Arbor. And then we're kind of off the grid. So they're on either zingtrain.com, that's our training business, or zingermanspress.com, that's the moniker that we publish under. And we can send them out. And if people want them for gifts or whatever, because I've had people buy like 50 of them and give them out to their staff who have worked through this. And a physician who bought a bunch, 30 or 40 of them, and he just gives them out to his good patients. It's a nice little token that's not really that costly. So I'm happy to we can arrange for that too. So zingermanspress.com or zingtrain.com, and then all the books are on there too.
All right. Awesome. Well, Ari, I've made a number of different notes here I'd like to share with everybody. These are my takeaways from our conversation.
Yeah, great.
So stick with the stuff, through the zone of doubt and blame, get through to the other side, keep running, keep writing. So I'm thinking tenacity.
Yeah.
Pick up the phone, reconnect with people. You never know what will come of it. I love that. Both business and personal visioning is important in a pandemic or any time, but this is especially good. Jump off the Corona coaster. Got that one. Now is a terrific time to create a life of your choosing. Kind of like that feeling. And then this last one was, no matter what you're going through, no matter the struggle, look for ways to add meaning. And that means a lot to me. So thank you for that, Ari.
Well, thank you guys. I mean, you're part of, in the ecosystem metaphor. I mean, we have our own Zingerman's community ecosystem here, and then sort of sub parts of that within the, as you mentioned, sitting at the Roadhouse or the Bakehouse or whatever, each have their own little piece of that, but in a wonderful way. And the phone calls play into this, is that we are part of a greater ecosystem too. And there's a lot of downsides of, globalization or whatever people like to get down on, but there's upsides of it too, which is that you and I could be having this call right now, and that here at Zingerman's, we have this connection with SRC that's 25 years running now, and that the work in the same way that I feel honored that the work we've done has contributed positively for you all. Going to Open Book 25 years ago has been a huge piece of what we do, and it's contributed enormously to us. And there's certainly been times, I haven't done it lately, but where I've called Jack and asked for help, and he's always, as you know, I mean, he always comes through, and he's very generous. And so we're part of this greater ecosystem, and just the more we can help each other get through all this, it'll just eventually be a good story that we laugh about. And like, remember when we had to wear masks? And we'll get past it. We'll get past it. But I have hope, which is what I wrote about in there. And I'm hopeful that we're headed in the right direction. So thank you all for contributing to our lives here and to the lives of so many around the country that are, or even around the world now, that are listening to this.
Likewise, Ari.
Same to you.
Great stuff. Well, folks, this is Ari Weinzweig with Working Through Hard Times, and you can catch that at zingtrain.com. Ari, it is always a pleasure. This has been really special. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Anytime, man.
All right.
Harley.
Folks, let's keep the
say hi to everybody down there.
Yeah, will do. So folks, let's keep the conversation going. Send us your questions, your stories, your best practices, ideas, challenges, and most of all, your victories. That is capitalism at its best. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.